the initial compound, correct?
Yes.
So if I said that water is a byproduct of this chemical process, is water a metabolite?
Generally wouldn't be considered a metabolite.
But I mean, is it?
I guess you could consider it. If for alcohol, for example, it's metabolized to carbon dioxide and acetaldehyde. Yeah, carbon dioxide is a metabolite of alcohol.
So let's get back to this. So water is a metabolite of marijuana, right?
I guess it could be considered that. Usually that's not what you're looking at.
But yes or no? Yes or no? Is it or not?
I've never heard anybody contend that. I wouldn't. I guess I would.
Yes. Is it a byproduct of the process?
It is a byproduct of the process.
And a byproduct of the process is a metabolite, right? Yes?
No, I would disagree with you, I guess, because it is not. You can have hydrolysis reactions, for example, where there are two hydrogen using water to split a molecule into two pieces, or where you're extracting a couple of hydrogens and an oxygen from a molecule here to make a molecule of water. But the metabolite is really chemically related to the parent. Since water really isn't chemically related to the parent, I would disagree with that assessment.
But wait a second. It's a product. It's a byproduct of it, right?
No, it is. It's a little bit different.
If you're going to say no, then I'm going to ask you this question. So when Jerry Garcia puffs on that marijuana cigarette, and 2 hours later, when this stuff is all happening in his body, you're saying that water is not a product of that chemical process?
It is a product of the chemical process, not a metabolite. I would disagree with your characterization of water as a metabolite.
Well, what's there any difference between?
Because a metabolite is a modification of the original compound that your body is excreting. When you excrete water from all the time, that's just a natural thing your body does.
It specifically does it though in this type of situation, right? It does, right?
But the water is not a modification of the compound. The chemical compound that is modified, it doesn't end up as water, it ends up as carboxy, THC, or hydroxy, or one of the other metabolites. So water is not chemically related to the original compound. So no, I would not contend that water is a metabolite. A byproduct of the process, yes. A metabolite, yes. No.
Okay,
I would say they were two different things.
So then you have this chemical reaction going on, and we've got water coming out of this now, and this carboxy THC. And now we were talking about levels earlier, and you said your average is about what, 30 nanograms?
About that, yes. So
this is about 2/3 below the average, right?
Yes.
Okay. So how long? Doesn't literature say that this carboxy THC in your blood can be around for days?
Not in your blood, no. In your urine, yes.
Well, what about in your blood? What's the maximum you've ever read about?
At the level that we can detect it? Most studies haven't gone that long, but no, the level that we can detect it not past 24 hours.
So you're saying that there really hasn't been any studies on it to determine how long carboxy THC can stay in your blood?
There have been, and some of them have reported findings of carboxy THC past that, but they are levels below the detection sensitivity of our laboratory. And I'm trying to think of, there wasn't any past 24 hours that we would be able to detect in blood.
Now, when we talk about metabolism in somebody's body, it's a very complex process, right?
Yes.
And what we're trying to do here is put a number of how fast the marijuana is metabolizing through the body and all that stuff. But when you're really looking at this, you need to know a bunch of different things about the person, right?
Looking at what in particular?
I suppose you need to know their age, weight, race, gender, how often they smoke, all that stuff, right?
How often they smoke, yes. And if you're looking at how long it's going to appear in the urine, their physiology would help. If they're a heavy person, that they may be able to sequester more marijuana, and it may take a while to clear all that, where if they're a skinny person, perhaps not. There's one study I know of, actually, that addressed that. But other than that, there isn't really a lot known about how fast anybody metabolizes it, just how long it will keep appearing in the urine after they've stopped smoking.
So, like when you were testifying about retrograde extrapolation with alcohol, and you said a 0.15 or 0.15 is the average, we don't have a number like that for marijuana.
Correct. It depends on the person's history with the drug.
Okay. So without knowing all that stuff, really, when you're trying to figure out when they smoked or how much they smoked, it's really kind of like guessing, right?
No, No, it's not like guessing, because we have laboratory studies and we have data we can draw on to look at this. And even though there isn't a rate like there is with alcohol, you can still look at the lab studies and say, if you smoke this much in these studies in your blood, it will show up for this long and no longer, and that's the longest this study has shown. So again, since you did point out that that's not a real high level, then that person probably didn't smoke 6 joints. Maybe he had 1. I don't really know. But it's not, I wouldn't expect him to have had a huge amount of marijuana that's going to show up in his urine for days, because I would still expect to see some THC present if that was the case. And based on lab studies, I would say it's not more than about 12 hours at this level with no THC present. That also, and...
So it could have been, well, let's figure this out then. So you're saying that even though we can't do a retrograde on this, that probably he could have smoked 12 hours before the blood draw, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, which leads me right into my next part of our little adventure in Woodstock. We're going to talk about marijuana impairment. Just because somebody smokes marijuana, that doesn't automatically mean that they're going to have to be impaired, right?
I would argue that it does, yes. If you smoke it, it's going to impair you.
Well, let's talk about it, though. Let's think about it in the context of drinking. If you and I were down there and, we're watching all these people in Woodstock smoking marijuana and just grooving out, and, we don't smoke marijuana, but we're bored, and, we're not driving the time machine back. So I crack open a beer and you crack open a beer. You and I both drink 1 beer. That's not going to make us impaired, right?
You would have to define impaired.
Well, say visible signs of being intoxicated, right?
One beer, probably not visible signs of intoxication at 1 beer.
So when we talk about marijuana, though, if somebody just takes 1 little puff, Mr. Smith just, he's not a big marijuana smoker, but he's in the drum circle, and the marijuana cigarette gets passed to him, and he just takes 1 little bitty tiny puff. That would be a different effect on his body than Jerry Garcia, who's over there smoking the big marijuana cigar, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of like when you and I we're drinking our beer, shaking our heads, going, I can't believe we're traveling in time. That's kind of like Mr. Smith and you and I are all in the same boat here. We've just consumed a very small amount of the drug.
What's important is what level you can detect in your system. So if you have such a tiny puff that no detectable THC is in your blood, then no, you wouldn't be impaired. I don't know if that is possible or not, because most lab studies that I know have not really addressed that issue. If you have 1 beer, that would probably make you an O2. At the end of the time you've drunk it, maybe an O1, you probably would not be visibly impaired. You wouldn't be exactly the same as you were when you were sober, but you would most likely not be visibly impaired. So it does depend on the dose that you're getting.
Now let's talk, and I know I sort of foreshadowed it earlier, let's talk about this test that happened in Amsterdam. And I know you've testified about it before in the Derrick case. And so let's talk about it again. Are you aware that there was a study on the effects of THC and alcohol in driving?
Yes.
And was that study done in Amsterdam?
Yes, it was commissioned by the federal government in Amsterdam.
And this is what struck me as the craziest part about this study, was that, correct me if I'm wrong here, they got a bunch of people together, they clear it with the police department out there, they have everybody get drunk, they get them up to between a 0.06 to a 0.08, and then they throw them behind the wheel of a car, and then they start having them smoke marijuana on the roads, right?
Yeah, it was a very interesting study. There were a couple parts of that. They did there was a driving study. They would get people impaired by alcohol, marijuana, or both, and put them behind the wheel. Some of the studies were done on a closed track. Others they put out on the street with an instructor who I think had a second brake pedal or something in case this. And there were cameras on the wheels of the cars, so they could see if the people had trouble swerving, if they were getting too close to the curbs, or if they were getting too close to the car in front of them or too far from the car in front of them, and they quantified all of this. And marijuana they had difficulty, standard deviation of lateral placement, I think is what they call it, the swerving, and keeping the car too close or too far from the car in front of them. They had difficulty with that.
So, and beyond the fact that it's the craziest experiment I've ever heard of, one of the major things they found was that, yes, if somebody has like a 0.06 blood alcohol level and smokes marijuana, their driving ability is going to be, you're going to be able to see the impairness on it, right?
That they were more